The Memphis Grizzlies are still very young, and they still have a ton of opportunity for growth, a ton of opportunity to break out, if you will. And I think that this is going to be an interesting season for various members of the Memphis Grizzlies to have that chance. You're listening to Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in. Thanks for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts. My name is Joe Mullinax. I am joined by my co-host, Mr. Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis. Damichael, how are you doing, sir?
Joe, we're doing good today, man. We're doing good. Another day to talk Grizzlies basketball, and I think, we got an exciting topic here. We're not going to focus on Ja Morant today. We're not focusing on Ja Morant. We're not going to focus on Jaren Jackson Jr. So
too much time for that.
Yeah, trust me. We're going to talk about those guys a whole lot. You don't have to worry about that. But depth, it's big in NBA. And Joe, just like I know, just like the listeners know, each team that ends up holding the Larry O.B. at the end of the season, that team has a breakout player. Last year for Golden State, we saw Jordan Poole. We saw Andrew Wiggins come into his own as this big-time defender.
Yeah, Wiggins was massively important.
He was massive. And, we've seen, with the Raptors a couple years back where Pascal Siakam turned into an all-star overnight, and the list goes on. But breakout players, the Grizzlies have some candidates. And without it being said, Joe, they're going to need some guys.
Absolutely. A lot has been made on Twitter and elsewhere in the Grizzly sphere of just what this team can be expected to do. We talked about expectations on our last episode of the show, or a couple episodes ago. And I do believe that there are expectations in place for this team, but just how well they meet those expectations is going to be directly decided by the development of this coaching staff, the way that they've built this roster. It's really going to be interesting to see. And I think that if we're talking breakout candidates, guys that are going to be the ones, I love your comps of Siakam and names like that get you over the hump, that get you to that championship stratosphere. Ja Morant's going to be there, right? Ja Morant is going to be that dude. But with Jaren Jackson Jr. out, I think my first candidate to Michael for a breakout performer has to be Desmond Bane, who, if we're going to eventually have a bold prediction episode of Locked On Grizzlies to Michael, I think Desmond Bane's going to be an all-star this year. That is a bold prediction of mine, because he's going to get the most valuable thing there is when it comes to having an all-star roster spot, and that's opportunity. With Jaren Jackson Jr. out, he is going to be the guy that is the true number 2 to Ja Morant. The gravity, I hate that phrase gravity. Makes me think we're talking about satellites in orbit, not, basketball.
We're flying on a basketball.
Yeah, field. Exactly. Ja Morant looks like he levitates, in fairness. So maybe he is the astronaut and he does have gravity, but so much attention is going to be paid to Ja that guys like Desmond Bane, even though folks are well aware he's not going to come out and surprise anybody, especially from 3, I think where Bane is going to surprise people, to Michael, is with his handle. That is not as well known. His ability to create off the dribble, his ability to be that backup point guard like he was last year. Maybe in the depths of a game plan that you'll have a paragraph written about that somebody can read on a random November night as they come into FedEx Forum to take on the Grizzlies. But Ja Morant is going to get the headlines. He's going to get the majority of the attention. I think Desmond Bane, in terms of basketball skill set, he reminds me a lot of Klay Thompson in this way. You look at Klay Thompson, you don't think elite athleticism. You just think he's got a truly elite skill as a shooter, and he has enough skills in his bag that he can get his in other ways if you overcommit to him as a shooter. I think Desmond Bane is going to be this next generation's Klay Thompson in that way. You don't think of him as this athlete, but he has so much that he can do from a basketball perspective to score the ball. I think Bane is a prime candidate, perhaps the prime candidate, for a breakout season for the Grizzlies. Because, again, opportunity is going to be there for him.
Opportunity is going to be there, Joe. You're right. And so Desmond Bain, right? Desmond Bain's the first guy that we're talking about, and I know a lot of Grizzlies fans say, oh, didn't he break out last season? He was a, candidate for, you know, most improved players and things like that. Well, Joe said something earlier, talked about a potential episode of a bold predictions episode and Desmond Bain being an all-star. So we're not talking about breaking out in terms of the league knows him. The league knows who Desmond Bain is. I've talked about it. I've talked about how all-star weekend, all those guys were saying, it's on our scouting report. That's the shooter. Do not leave him. They know that. That's common knowledge around the league at this point, especially after the way he beat the Timberwolves. You can make an argument he was the most important Grizzlies player. You know, Brandon Clark will get, you know, some votes as well. But you can make an argument that Desmond Bain was the most important Grizzlies player in that series against the Timberwolves, and he was the reason they won. You also can make an argument that Desmond Bain's back struggles against Golden State that slowed him down was a big reason why the Grizzlies didn't win that series. So with that being said, Joe, I think you're right. You're onto something here. And you mentioned something that I actually have written about this summer. I've talked about earlier this summer as well. The ball handling potential with Desmond Bane. There is the growth there. I think being that the Grizzlies drafted Kennedy Chandler, being that, you know, Tyus Jones is here, they won't need him to be more of that on the ball guy. But there is a huge opportunity there as the Grizzlies add to the offense, add little kinks here and there for him to be a secondary playmaker where, you know, he talked about it, you know, toward the end of the season. And I talked to him about this as well, where he said, look, he'd love to be that guy, you know, that gets Ja, you know, backdoor cut opportunities and things like that. Think about prime Dwayne Wade, prime Russell Westbrook in OKC. Yeah, I see you, Joe. You're thinking about it right now. When those
just, guys, the images are just floating in my head. It feels so lovely.
Ja just running through the back door and just slamming on some dudes. I mean, I like that Desmond Bane comp, but yeah, you mentioned it. The handle, he has a lot of potential to grow there. But it's not just that, Joe. The 2-point potential as well. We mentioned the 3-point shooting. The mid-range shooting was really good. But I think, you know, as he hones into, you know, teams start to close out more and make him drive the basketball, there's potential for him to finish better around the rim as well.
Absolutely. He's going to have a lot of chances to grow his game in that way. And again, I think you make a fair point, Damichael. Chances are, if you're listening to this show, you know, we get folks that like to just, hey, what's going on with the Grizzlies today? I'm going to go check out Locked On Grizzlies, which of course you should make your first listen every day if you don't already do so. What's going on with you? But I think that we're kind of a niche in terms of Grizzlies fans are coming to this. They want to hear Damichael, to a lesser extent me. You know, they want to get a Grizzlies fix every day. So it's important to point out, we see what Desmond Bane can do on a daily, nightly basis because we follow the team, cover the team. ESPN put out their list of top 100 guys, like numbers 100 through 25, I think, or 26 recently. And Desmond Bane was ranked number 68, I think, 68 or 69. Players like Russell Westbrook were ranked in front of Desmond Bane. Players like Jeremy Grant were ranked in front of Desmond Bane. And there were other names that Tyrese Maxi, I think, might have been ranked in front of Desmond Bane. And I don't want to be quoted on that. I might pull it up in front of me here while you rebut here in a moment, Damichael. I just think that it's important. We as Grizzlies folks say Desmond Bane's good, and we know and we understand it. I don't think the rest of the league as a whole fully appreciates and understands just how good Desmond Bane is. And that makes him even more in line to be that breakout candidate. Because again, it's like the most improved player award last season. Everybody assumed it was going to be Desmond Bane. Why would Ja do it? Ja is in the MVP conversation. But if you go by the natural definition of the national award, he was a Ja Morant made all the sense in the world to win that award. Yeah. So I think this is going to be a similar situation for Bane in that he is well known in Memphis circles, not so much beyond.
Yeah, it's a great point because the thing about Desmond Bane is he's known as a shooter. That's how the league knows him. In Memphis, there's much more to his game. I think I have a unique perspective here, being that I came in December, you know, to cover the Grizzlies. Before that, you know who I heard about as the rising sophomore all around the league? I heard about Tyrese Maxi because I was up there at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and kind of just how the people talk about Desmond Bane here. That's how they view Tyrese Maxi. up in Philly. So, you know, it's a regional thing, and, you know, same way with guys like Tyrese Halliburton, and depending on where you are, you know, when he was in Sacramento and things like that. But Desmond Bane, I think this is the year. You mentioned it. We're talking about breakout candidate, because it's not necessarily a breakout in terms of, you know, he averaged, you know, over 18 points a game last season, over 43% from three-point range. His numbers may minimally go up. He may average 21 points on 41% from three-point range, because teams are going to be more attached to him. So you might not see it in the numbers, but the breakout for him will come in the notoriety in terms of how many games he's going to win for this team, not just with three-point shooting. They're going to be on national TV more. People are going to have more eyes on him. Like you just said, Joe, they're going to see these things. And once they see that, Desmond Bain, the awards will come in. You know, you mentioned, you know, all-star recognition, a potential another. He wants to be in that three-point shootout again really bad. That could come back again as well. So I think he is the perfect candidate for us to kick this off when we're talking about breakout potential players. But, Joe, he's not the only one.
No, he's not the only one at all. And I have the list in front of me now from ESPN.com. Number 44 is Tyrese Maxi. No disrespect to Tyrese Maxi. I think he's a really good basketball
player. Yeah.
That he's not 24 players better than Desmond Bain. But that's one of the flaws of putting out a list like this, right? Everybody's going to crush it and say that it's awful. I'm going to say, if I were a betting man, I would bet that Desmond Bain finishes a lot higher than 68 when they redo these rankings come the spring. Speaking of betting, I don't know how much of a gambler you are, Damichael, but I use betonline.net. It is my number one source, and it should be your number one source for all your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. BetOnline is also your continued source for all your sport wagering information, live betting, esports, scores. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite sports events, including Major League Baseball, MMA, boxing, golf, and of course, the National Basketball Association. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. Bet online, where the game starts. The game starts for the Memphis Grizzlies, looking at the reserves for me, because I feel like the starters, except for, you know, who fills in for Jaren, they're kind of set, right? You got Bane, you've got John Morant, you've got Dillon Brooks, you got Steven Adams. That seems like a pretty strong foursome entering into the campaign. A lot of the questions reside with the reserves for me. And Tyus Jones just got a new contract. Brandon Clark, we mentioned as an extension candidate on a recent episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Those guys are going to be in that mix. Zaire Williams is going to see an increased role. My next guy, who, again, we talk about opportunity, Damichael. The next person who's going to be in a spot to have opportunity would be John Conchar. Now, John Conchar is a bit of a lightning rod amongst Grizzlies fans right now. He is someone who, as much as a lightning rod as your ninth guy in the rotation can be, I suppose. Conchar is clearly the heat check of this front office in terms of looking at the roster, having opportunity, at least in theory, to add scoring, to add a talent that could provide buckets off the bench, and choosing instead to extend John Conchar and put him in a place where it's going to be his position to lose in terms of being a contributor to this offense. That is all to say that his percentages look great. His advanced numbers are really strong. However, I always bring up his usage rate being lower than that of Steven Adams. And if you've watched the Memphis Grizzlies recently, that's not necessarily a good thing. It's not like Steven Adams is an offensive focus. So if your usage rate in terms of how you fit within an offensive scheme is lower than Adams, it makes me nervous about how the carefully cultivated opportunities, as Keith Parrish of Fast Break Breakfast put it, how those are going to translate. So Conchar is different from Bane. I'm very confident in Bane taking that next step. Conchar, I'm a little more hesitant about. Again, as much as a ninth man on a team can be a breakout candidate, he's going to have that chance. I'm not as sold on him being able to follow through on it. So
you mentioned it at the top as the very most important thing here is that his breakout is going to come with more opportunity. Sure. That's where I think it starts with John Conchar. But he's also a different player. He doesn't play like DeAnthony Melton. Don't expect him to come out and just chunk threes up and play defense and things like that. Different player, doesn't play like Desmond Bain. John Conchar is a quote unquote shooting guard. He plays like a freaking center. Like he's gonna crash the glass. I mean, I remember
he's a stretch two somehow.
Yeah, there it is. He's a stretch two. I like that.
Stretch wing.
Stretch two. That's what we're gonna call him going forward on Locked On Grizzlies. The stretch wing, John Conchar. I asked him. It's like, man, look, how do you end up with all these rebounds? I think it was the 18 rebound, 19 rebound game he had against Minnesota in the regular season in February, and it was like, how do you get all these boards? And everyone's just like, he has a nose for the ball. He knows how to find the ball. Joe, that's a skill. Everyone,
you don't have to tell me that. I watched Zach Randolph play basketball for several years in Memphis. Yeah, definitely a valuable skill.
And he got him on his tippy toes, right? So with that being said, this guy, he's going to be different. I think Grizzlies fans first have to accept that. He's going to be your shooting guard. For one, he's going to space the floor. But once that ball is shot, he's going to beeline to the rim. And he's going to be active. I think they trust him defensively. I'm going to give you an example of how much this team does trust him defensively. There was a game earlier this season. They lost against the Timberwolves. Zaire Williams, they put him in a lot of interesting situations for a rookie. He was primarily guarding D'Angelo Russell. Russell was cooking him that game. He was straight up cooking him. And in the fourth quarter, same thing's happened. He's cooking him again. You got DeAnthony Melton on the bench. You got all these other guys. In the last couple minutes of the fourth quarter, Taylor Jenkins goes to his bench, points to John Conchar. That's the guy he called on. We asked him at the end, why John Conchar? It's the guy he trusts to get the job done defensively, not just in terms of slotting his feet standing from D'Angelo Russell, but in terms of the assignments and things like that. I think that's where John Conchar makes his breakouts. We're not talking 12 points a game, 10 points a game type numbers. We're probably talking about 6-7 rebounds per game off the bench. Right. I think that's possible. That may be a stretch, but depending on the minutes he gets, but his rebound per 40 minutes, I bet those numbers are going to be strong, Joe. I think there's real opportunity here. You mentioned it. Usage is not going to be high, and quite frankly, I don't think they're going to need the usage to be high because you're going to have Zaire Williams. You're going to have David Roddy, Jake Loravia. You're going to have Brandon Clark. You're going to have Tyus Jones. I don't think you like what I just said, but I don't think you need it. The usage to be high for him. You need a secondary ball handler. I think that's why they're grooming Zaire for their role. But Joe, what's your problem with John Conchar?
Somebody's got to put the ball in the basket, Damichael. You know that. Somebody's got to score at some point, and I know that they can stagger rotations, and you'll have Desmond Bain with the reserves, and you'll have Dillon Brooks with the reserves. I get all that. Maybe you even try the risky, in my opinion, but possible Tyus Jones, Ja Morant backcourt. You let Ja play as the two guard a little more. There's lots of things that Taylor Jenkins, the head coach of the Grizzlies, can do to try to offset my concerns. That doesn't make them any less valid when eventually, which he always does, and every coach in the history of the NBA, we talk about staggering rotations all the time, and then it'll not fail. It'll be a random game in November, and you and I will talk the next day about the Tyus Jones, John Conchar, Zaire Williams, Brandon Clark, Xavier Tillman, or Jake Loravia starting unit that went out there, and no one scored the basketball. No one scored. So I am worried, can he translate those great numbers? Because they are great. Can he translate that to even if it's, a couple percentage points higher? I just have my questions about it. But in fairness to John, he has been the shining example of the development of this coaching staff in terms of taking a player, doing things with them to maximize their talent. And Damichael, you hit a home run on one point. John Conchar is essentially Taylor Jenkins' new Grayson Allen in terms of that's his security blanket as a guy. He knows what the job is. He knows what he's supposed to do. He understands where he fits. He's not going to go over his head. I think he makes a lot of sense in lineups where Jaren is your 5 for his rebounding prowess. If Jaren Jackson Jr. is not going to be as strong of a rebounder, get as many wings in there that you can that are strong rebounders, and Conchar is a great example of that. So I am less confident in Conchar's ability to break out, so to speak. But I do think that the context is important, that him being a breakout player for these Grizzlies is just being able to be a consistent winning rotation player in the NBA, considering he's a former Mastodon, whatever the heck that is, as a basketball player. He's had a remarkable run to come from out of nowhere to on a team that has title aspirations. He's in a spot to be a meaningful contributor. Breaking out can look different for different players.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're saying. Breaking out looks different for these different guys, and at the end of the day, it's going to be opportunity with him. You know, you're right. Someone has to put the ball in the basket, but you know what? He did shoot 40+% from 3-point range.
Right, on an extremely low usage.
I know where you were going with it, Joe. Extremely low usage, yes. But I trust Tyus Jones. I think you trust Tyus Jones too.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, at the end of the day, he's one of those guys where the guys around him, the way they play will dictate his offensive impact. His energy and things like that, offensive rebounding, defensive rebounding, they'll have nothing to do with that. He'll control that. I think John Conchar has the potential to be impactful. And, I mean, I think he's deserving of this role. Is he better than DeAnthony Melton? That's but, you know, I think he's definitely proven, you know, that he can step into this role and be successful. But guess what, Joe? Though we've talked about a couple guys now. This roster's so deep. There's still even more players that have the potential to break out.
And there's lots of young guys that are going to have that exact same opportunity that we've been talking about throughout this episode. When we come back to Michael and I are going to talk about one in particular who seems primed to maybe shock the NBA world and perhaps be starting next to Ja Morant come opening night. You'll see who we're talking about after this break. Damichael, the Grizzlies brought 5 rookies, back into the fold. They did the exact opposite that a lot of people thought they were going to do. A lot of folks said, oh, they're going to go and get a veteran, you know, Harrison Barnes, you know, someone that's going to come in and be that vet that's going to take them to the next level. Wrong answer. They go and they bring in 5 dudes, obviously a couple through two-way contracts, but they bring in 5 young players to make this roster even younger. And one of them that really jumps out to me is my last breakout candidate for this coming season is Jake Loravia, the sweet shooting forward wing out of Wake Forest. I know that he had a really bad summer league. It didn't look good in terms of his ability. And we talked about how Xavier Tillman didn't dominate summer league at this stage. He probably should, and that makes you a little bit nervous. We got to remember Loravia is a rookie. We got to remember that summer league is fool's gold. I keep bringing up Josh Selby, Jordan Adams. There's all sorts of guys that looked the part playing against other dudes that maybe belonged in the NBA. I know that you're a hoop head. You watch basketball. You play a lot of basketball. I've played a lot of basketball, not at the professional level, obviously, but just if you've played basketball, you can look at someone's shooting stroke. If you've watched enough basketball, you can see how someone aligns themselves in terms of the technique of shooting. And you know that dude can shoot. Yeah. Loravia can shoot. So I am not worried after watching his form about what he is capable of as a shooter for this team. And I think that with Jaren Jackson Jr. out, and I think we may have talked about this before, he makes a lot of sense for me, even if he's not the starter on opening night. Getting a lot of minutes with those first 4 guys of Bain and Morant and Brooks and Adams, because they have to find ways to score in the half court and maximize the opportunities they're going to get there, because they're not going to get as many transition chances this year. They're just not. You can't get rid of Kyle Anderson and DeAnthony Melton and say you're going to have the same success the exact same way. You can say that the team can still improve, get better. That's certainly possible. It just has to look different, because Anderson, and especially Anderson, but even Melton, were unique basketball players. Loravia gives you the best shot to have half-court success, in part because of that sweet shooting stroke and his ability to shoot off the handle, or off the catch and shoot, excuse me. He has a little bit of a good enough handle that he can get something for himself. Maybe not every time, but he to me, of the rookies, is the most primed for a breakout season. And obviously David Roddy will maybe be in that mix. Kennedy Chandler is blocked by Tyus Jones. He kind of looks like a long-term project. So it might be a cheap cop-out answer. But for me, of all the young guys, Loravia is most primed. If the 10th man in the rotation is going to be one of the rookies, I think it's going to be Loravia.
Yeah, so I like Jake Loravia as well. I've talked about him. I've written about him too, Joe. But let me tell you about a conversation I had with someone who knows Jake Loravia really well. I had a conversation with Steve Forbes. Steve Forbes, coach at Wake Forest, and gave me some real good insight on Jake Loravia from the perspective of this. Check this out. So, I asked him, I'm like, Jake Loravia, man, you mentioned it, Joe. This guy has this pretty shoot stroke. We watched this first game in Summer League, and he's lighting it up out there in Utah. And it's like, the Grizzlies did it again. The Grizzlies did it again. Josh tweeting about him. Desmond Bain tweeting about him. And, he looks like that next guy, and then he just vanishes. He's not taking shots. He's 0 for 2 in games. He's 0 for 1. Gets the Nets, I believe it was. He doesn't take a shot for, a certain, until late in the fourth quarter or something like that. So it's like, Steve, I'm talking to Steve Forbes, and I'm asking him, saying, what's the deal there? And Steve Forbes actually said this to me, and I'm going to paraphrase, but he basically said, he's coached a lot of talented players, which Steve Forbes has done. Really good college basketball coach. And he said, Jake Loravia, out of his most talented players, he's probably one of the few players that he's actually had to, ask him to be more aggressive, to shoot the basketball with his type of talent. And that kind of surprised me in a way, but it was definitely, more intel. And he talked about over the course of the season, he adjusted. He did shoot the basketball more. He did shoot the basketball better. But I think that is definitely something with Jake Loravia there. He's going to turn down shots. He sometimes turns down a good shot, tries to get a great shot when he should have took the good shot, and there is no great shot that comes after that. I think that's some of the case with him. So I think he's going to be one of those guys that probably has to make that adjustment. Now, you mentioned something that I like to point out, too, with Summer League. It can be fool's gold. I think some players look good in Summer League, and it's legit. And some players look bad in Summer League, and they can turn it around. He's one of those guys that can turn it around because he's a complimentary player. He's a guy who's going to play well off of guys. He's going to space the floor. He's going to knock down open shots. He wasn't getting many of those. Why? Well, the Grizzlies, basically, they had a lot of guys out there, but they were trying Zaire Williams at point guard. Kenny Chandler mentioned that outside of Kenny Lofton Jr., he'd not played with any of those guys before. So all of that was going on, and Jake Loravia wasn't getting the shots that he's going to get with Tyus Jones, that he's going to get with John Morant. That's a big difference here. I think you're onto something. Jake Loravia is a guy who I think could break out. I also got one more for you. And
sure,
I want to throw his name in here because Locked On Grizzlies fans, they probably know who I'm going to say. I've talked about this guy a lot. Go to the Grizzlies roster last season, Joe. Brandon Clark had the highest two-point field goal percentage on the team. You know who was second? I'm going to go ahead and tell you. It's going to surprise you. Zaire Williams. Second highest two-point field goal percentage. We saw the improvement from three-point range where he shot over 36% after, from February on from three-point range. Combine that three-point shooting improvement with that two-point percentage, that's going to even improve even more because he's going to be a little bit stronger and he's kind of going to grow into his body even more. With his ability and his confidence with the mid-range jumper, that's the guy, Joe. I think Jake Loravia is definitely someone to highlight, and I also think Zaire Williams, we're talking about, taking a considerable jump into possibly averaging double figures.
And of all the names we've mentioned, not named Desmond Bane, Zaire Williams figures to have the best chance at opportunity, right? If they need a guy that needs to be that sixth man scorer, Zaire's going to get the first crack at it, safe to say. So Zaire Williams certainly will be in that mix as well as the other names that we mentioned here. Thanks again for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen every day. Tomorrow's show, Damichael's going to be flying solo. He's got a lot of good stuff for you guys. Jaren's foot, so a little bit of insight onto the injury with Jaren entering training camp and some other items. So Damichael gets to fly solo for an episode. So make sure you're checking that out, with Damichael. Anything else you want to add on that, Damichael, for the folks as you enter a solo episode?
That's pretty much it. We're gonna go strong here. Stay tuned. Jaren Jackson Jr. I think is progressing really well. We're gonna talk more about that on tomorrow's episode too. But not just that. We talked about breakout players. there's going to be a lot of potential on this team, for players who, and that's not what to call them breakout players, but Dillon Brooks, Xavier Tillman, these guys are going to be put in positions they weren't put in last season. I think Dillon Brooks because of injury, Xavier Tillman possibly because of opportunity. It's going to be a really interesting season. We can talk about that more as we get closer to training camp and when we get into it, y'all.
I like it, Damichael. So make sure you're sticking with Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you for continuing to make our show, Locked On Grizzlies, your first listen. Now go and make sure that you're checking out the NBA Top 50 on Locked On NBA as your second listen. Which NBA player moves the betting line the most this season? Where do the Grizzlies fit in that conversation? Maybe you'll see a familiar face as part of those episodes. Locked On and the Bet Online Odds Makers present the NBA Top 50 Most Valuable Players. Find it on Locked On NBA, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. So thank you so much to Damichael. It's been a blast getting into the routine here, getting things shaken out. Hopefully we continue to grind and go forth and just get into basketball, because finally we will have Grizzlies basketball to talk about moving forward. So for Damichael, I'm Joe. Thank you. Catch you next.